Welcome. I don't know about you, but I really like looking at different kinds of things under a microscope. In this short segment, I want to take you through some basic characteristics of two groups of cells so that you can just understand more about the structure that you're seeing. So cells and their structures, specifically prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So in this program, you will be able to distinguish these two important designs in cells. Okay? Stay with me. Now, before we get underway, I'd like you to pause the program just for a moment and turn your notebook sideways and make two large overlapping circles and label them as you see here. By the end of the program, I'm going to ask you to go back and compare and contrast what you see in regard to prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Okay? First, we're going to take a look at prokaryotic cells. Yeah, bacteria. As a matter of fact, this is a simplification, but there's bacteria, those kinds of cells, and then there's everything else, all the other organisms that you see in the world. Okay? That includes plants and animals, fungi, protists, and so on. Now, let's take a look at some examples of those. First here is an example of what we refer to as a coccus, a spherically shaped bacteria. And the example that I have, as you can see on the screen, is Staphylococcus aureus. You may have seen this before. If you've ever heard of MRSA, that's one variety of Staphylococcus aureus. We just refer to it as Staph aureus. These normally can be found on the surface of your skin, but if they get into a wound, they can cause an infection. Did you ever get a cut on your hand that didn't quite heal and got pussy? Well, it may have been due to Staph aureus getting in there. Next, there is a type of rod-shaped bacteria known as bacillus. You can see it here at the bottom of the screen. One great example that you may have heard about in the news before is Escherichia coli. You may have heard it as E. coli. We find these normally in the intestinal tract of mammals, including man. So normally they're harmless, but certain strains can cause illness. And then there's a third class of bacteria. Keep in mind we're classifying these by shape, known as a sporillum. And you can see this where I have the tip of the arrow. These kind of look like microscopic springs. So they're in the shape of a coil down here. And the one that we're looking at right here is known as Treponema pallidum, which is actually causing a type of sexually transmitted disease known as syphilis. Pretty nasty, huh? But again, here's a third shape of bacteria. Now, there is a generalized design that we see in bacteria, in prokaryotic cells. I'd like you to pause the program now and make a quick sketch in your notebook of the features that you see behind me of prokaryotic cells. Notice we have the DNA that is free-floating in the cytoplasm, which is the liquid insides of the cell. We have a variety of other things as well. Ribosomes, which are going to make proteins. Plasmid, which can carry genetic information. Pili, which are actually an extension of the plasma membrane that goes out beyond the cell wall and the capsule. And this is used for sensory transduction within the cell. We can see this outer coat that you can see is the cell wall that's going to vary in composition. And oftentimes you can see a capsule that surrounds that as well that can be made out of protein. And some bacteria actually have a tail that's going to be attached to a motor that's going to propel it through its watery environment. Next, I'd like to look at eukaryotic cells. You can remember that from your notes, eukaryotic. And here's one example of a eukaryotic cell, and that's a nerve cell, what we refer to as a neuron. And these, of course, are found in the nervous system throughout your body, the brain, the central nervous system, the spinal cord, as well as peripheral nerves that can go all the way down to the tips of your fingers. Notice they have these long extensions on them, so they're really quite unusual. There's also a nucleus that you can identify in the center. And keep in mind that what you're looking at right here is a computer-enhanced image of a neuron. So if you were to look at nerve cells under a light microscope, it's not going to look like this. There are many different types of microscopes, and they all have their particular advantage. This one has been computer-enhanced using color. Another great example of eukaryotic cells are muscle tissues or muscle cells that you can see in the background behind me. These are smooth muscle. They're found in the digestive organs of your body as well as your abdomen. And you'll notice that they have a nucleus as well. These have a spindle-shaped type cell, and the nucleus is kind of cigar-shaped. There are many, many types of eukaryotic cells, but they're all going to have the same basic features. Now, if you haven't already done so someplace else, I'd like you to pause the program and make a very simple sketch of this animal cell for your own benefit. In a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to compare and contrast the structures that you see labeled here with those that we looked at in prokaryotic cells, because there's more to come. There are also plant cells. Here we look at palisade cells, which are found in the leaves of true plants. And you can see all these green structures that are in here. Leaves are green, aren't they? There's probably some kind of relationship. Now, what would be green that would be in plants that would help plants to grow? Think about that for a minute, because that's a plant cell. Now, here's a simplified diagram of a plant cell. Do you notice any green structures that are there that we saw on the slide just previously? I'd like you to take a moment again and make a simple diagram in your notes concerning the structures that you see identified here. Again, in a couple minutes, we're going to contrast this plant cell and the animal cell with what we see in the prokaryotic cells, the bacteria. Keep in mind, both plant and animal cells are examples of eukaryotic organisms. But guess what? There's more to eukaryotic organisms than just plants and animals. Here we have some algal cells that you'll notice form long strands. These cells grow in colonies, and yet they're not a true plant. They don't have true roots or true leaves or true stems. They live in a watery environment, but they do live in colonies like this. But guess what? They have a lot of the same features that we looked at previously in the plant cell. And here's yet another example. Here is a type of green algae known as Volvox, and these dwell in colonies that can be up to 60,000 cells, all in one colony. And again, they float in their watery environment. Again, you can see that bright color green. The structures on the inside are immature versions of what you see on the outside. And yet, they're just simple cells that are algae. Here's another great example. Now, we've looked at plants and animals in eukaryotic cells. This is one that doesn't really fit into either category of plant or animal, just like the algae. These are called Euglena, and you notice they're green, they're photosynthetic, and yet these also have a tail, although you can't see it in this photograph. These can actually swim in the direction where they sense light to be. So they can move like an animal that you would associate with an animal, and yet they have the characteristics of plants as well. Algae and these Euglena fall into another kingdom known as protists, but they are still eukaryotic cells. Finally, one more example I want to take a look at. You may have seen this in the laboratory with me, the paramecium, and this acts like a one-celled little carnivore. It's going to go around munching on other kinds of cells. So in a sense, this protist, paramecia, kind of acts like an animal because it's munching on other cells. It's carnivorous, but it's not an animal. It's actually in that kingdom of protists. Again, protists are also examples of those that have eukaryotic cells. They're much more complex than what we see in the prokaryotic cells. Now, remember at the beginning of the program I asked you to make this diagram. I'd like you to fill in the characteristics and features that you see that are only found in prokaryotic cells over here, right here where I am now. fill in this area of those features of eukaryotic cells that you only find there, and then where there's an overlap, what do each of these classes of cells have in common? Put that right where the circles overlap here. All right. Well, you've now got a basic introduction to cell biology so that when you look through the microscope the next time, you'll understand whether you're looking at prokaryotic or eukaryotic cells. Hey, have fun with those circles there. And again, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.